let's reflect on this. What role does the church have in my understanding of Jesus? The church, it can mean many different things for different people. The church. For the many thousands of people gathered in St. Peter's Square, from so many countries and backgrounds, watching the Pope give a blessing from the balcony, the emotional gathering of the church gives an extraordinary feeling of oneness and shared faith. TV pictures of Pope Francis in the embrace of blessing suffering and disabled people electrify the world and capture the global imagination. We can imagine the embrace of Jesus himself communicated within the gathering of the 21st century church. What about the church as the guardian of our faith and moral life? Our thoughts go back to the words of Jesus himself. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You can see beautiful mosaics in ancient churches, especially in Rome, that show Christ handing a scroll or a key to Peter. And this meant the mandate to teach and preserve the faith intact for all time. In some ways, though, as vital as it is, this image of the church is more abstract than actually being there in the crowd in St. Peter's Square. Others will say that the term the church immediately reminds them of being part of the community celebrating the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, especially in a Sunday gathering. And this takes us a lot closer to answering the question as to how necessary the church really is in our quest for Jesus. Of course, we have to ask, what did Jesus himself intend? And how do we know that? To answer that, we have to go back to the very beginnings of what has come to be known as the church. The scene is the upper room. Imagine it. That same room where the Last Supper was celebrated. The time is the evening of that first Easter Sunday, and a number of disciples have gathered. They don't realise it, but they have been called together by an inner force. And there, suddenly, is Jesus. Some marks of his traumatic passion can still be recognised, as if to reinforce his identity. Gently but unmistakably, he begins to communicate to each disciple in a way that enters deep into the person. Receive the Holy Spirit. He is convincing them of his true presence. And from this, a host of other things begin to spring up. A sense of somehow sharing in what he himself had experienced in his passion, in his death, and now mysteriously in his rising to new life. Each disciple begins to experience a new dawn of hope, of new direction, of union with God, and of a special kind of love. And this love seems to spread from person to person. Here, in this unique setting, the church is born. What Jesus did was to impart the faith. And this does not mean just a set of ideas or convictions or propositions. What St. John's Gospel describes is something alive and penetrating of the Holy Spirit making a home within us, communicating the divine presence and the effectiveness of all that Jesus himself had achieved. The fact is that even though he revealed himself individually to some, like Mary Magdalene, Peter, James, it was within gatherings of the church that his fullest revelation took place. St. Luke gives us a powerful narrative of his appearance to those two disciples as they trudged towards Emmaus on that same Easter Sunday afternoon. And then behind them came Jesus. Step by step, he revealed the word of the Scriptures to them both and prepared them for the greatest communication of himself when he broke the bread of Eucharist with them. And they recognised him in the breaking of bread. But as soon as he left them, they took the road back to Jerusalem as fast as they could, back to the church gathered in that upper room and into the charged atmosphere of those who were convinced that the living presence of the risen Lord was there with them. It was here, in the midst of a transformed group of people, that those two disciples recounted their experience and then had their own faith authenticated and reinforced. They found that their own experience took on a new aspect as it searched out and took hold in the hearts of others. Here was the church, Christ's community, in action. Interesting that in those years, just after Jesus' resurrection, the earliest Christian communities had a name for themselves: the assembly. Seems simple enough, the word assembly, but when you dig beneath the surface of the Greek word they used, the ecclesia, you find that it should be described as the gathering of those being called together. Who is doing the calling? The Holy Spirit. When is the call made? Continually, in an ongoing way. In other words, we're talking about something vibrant, alive, and God-directed. That ecclesia is the church that we know. It was within these assemblies of the church, scattered throughout the Roman Empire, that the Holy Scriptures of the New Testament were written and sent to the far corners of the Christian world. Each gospel, each letter, each word of consolation and encouragement really came out of the life of local communities in their need for formation, for teaching, for solving crises, and for seeing the bigger picture of where the faith is heading, so often obscured by the ups and downs of daily struggle. And these writings were read out when each community celebrated the Eucharist, and the leader's homily applied them to the particular situations they were facing. This was God's living word in action at the grassroots. It was a building block of the church. Remember our main question: what role does the church have in my understanding of Jesus? Put that same question to people of those early times and you can be sure of the answer. My church My church is fundamental to how I know Jesus and what role he plays in my life. I couldn't do without this church because my church forms me. And that's what I believe Jesus intended. We could perhaps go a little further to say that the church, especially when the Eucharist is being celebrated, creates a special atmosphere of intercommunication between God and ourselves. And in this special space, a number of things are set in action. Firstly, we are drawn into the realm of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We form part of the conversation which passes between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and our prayer takes on a new value because we are on familiar terms with God. Next, we find ourselves in a position where Jesus, the prophet, the teacher, challenges us to conform our lives to his. And what a job that is. He opens the scriptures for us. And this means that we are called to make personal adjustments, judgments, decisions, so that we can fit in with God's plan for each one of us. And perhaps then we will see the bigger picture and our part in it. Then we will need special formation and assistance in what it means to belong in God's church, to be truly part of it, to identify with its vocation and mission in the world, and to share its ideals and hopes for transforming the world. Above all, that we ourselves share in the true presence of Jesus and are able to communicate this life to those around us. Finally, we need to learn how to serve as Jesus does. When he washed the disciples' feet at the Last Supper, this was not just an exercise in sending a symbolic message, a motherhood statement in action. This was God's own divine compassion, love, and mercy that Jesus knew intimately. And it was this that urged Jesus to act as he did. He himself was a perfect conduit for such divine love, God's perfect Son and servant. But his intention is to carry on the exact same loving service through the members of the church, his body. It's not easy to keep these things in the forefront of the mind in the world of today, the world of the 21st century. We're surrounded by a swirling cloud of what-ifs, doubts and fears, of wonderings of whether it's all true. There is that big temptation to opt out, to head out on your own, especially when it seems that the church itself needs to constantly reform itself in its struggle to come to grips with life in an ever-changing world. But that was the story of the earliest communities too, those that formed the church in the first place. It means an ongoing purification of our intentions and a renewed faith in where we are going. But if the church is Jesus amongst us, then our hope is not misplaced. I am with you always, even to the end of the world.